Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for Common Start, Racial Equity and Childcare. My name is Bree Nichols. I am the Brockton North grassroots organizer for the Coalition for Social Justice, and I will be co-facilitating tonight with LaToya Gale.
Thank you, Bree. My name is LaToya Gale, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy with Neighborhood Villages. So before we get started tonight, could I ask we want to do some logistics. So can I ask our translators, we'll have Spanish translation tonight. If our translators can introduce themselves and instruct people how to access translation.
Good evening, everyone. So glad to be here with you. My name is Reed. We do have Spanish interpretation available tonight, and just a quick walkthrough so everyone can get selected on their preferred English language channel. In just a moment, you'll see a globe icon that'll show up right at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This is where you can click and select either English or Spanish. If you're on a cell phone or a tablet, you can click on the 3 dots button right next to the word more. And from there, you can choose your language. And now I'll turn it over to Shay to make that announcement in Spanish.
Buenas noches a todos. Sí, tenemos interpretación esta noche con español e inglés. Mi nombre es Shay y ahora van a poder ver un icono, un globo en el parte hacia abajo de la pantalla y debes seleccionar tu lenguaje, idioma preferida. Hay 2 canales. En un celular o tableta puedes escoger los 3 puntos, un botón de 3 puntos y puedes escoger lenguaje de interpretación. Cada persona debe seleccionar su propio idioma. Gracias.
Okay, and we'll leave a few seconds while folks click on that globe icon and select either English or Spanish. Ahora todo el mundo debe poder ver ese icono de un globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccionar su idioma.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm going to briefly review the goals of tonight's event, which will be to develop deeper relationships with coalition partners, broaden our base of supporters, highlight how Common Start helps promote racial equity, and prepare for action. But first, I'd like to ground us tonight. As it is Black History Month, I'd like to introduce Colin Knight to speak with us tonight on the history of childcare in Massachusetts and racial equity.
How you guys doing this evening? I think that's a heavy and big task from Bree, but I definitely would like to talk a little bit about some of the historical figures of Roxbury specifically. One of those figures is Melnia Cass, and she was a huge figure in the Roxbury community and started as the first woman to be appointed to the ABCD program in 1961. Which also has a Head Start program that still is in existence today, and was huge when we're talking about affordable housing and other things of that nature. And as we all know, the ABCD program has a huge Head Start program and takes care of mothers and children in a lot of different ways. And so she's a definite person in Boston's Black history to talk about and to highlight this month. And then when we're talking about equity and racial equity, another Black woman that I'd love to talk about is Ruth Batson, who was very, very big in education in those days. In the 1960s, she spearheaded the METCO program in 1966, which allowed for children of color within communities of Boston to go to schools in the suburbs. And still today, there are 3,000 plus kids that go to METCO programs to get a better education. And as we all know, we are still struggling when we're talking about fair and equitable education in the city of Boston. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But we all need to highlight that work started in the 1960s with Ruth Batson and her work in education. And so I just wanted to highlight those two wonderful women for the work that they did within communities of color in the Boston area.
Thank you so much, Colin, for grounding us tonight and remembering that the fight for racial equity in education and childcare is nothing new to us, but a fight that we shall continue. And I will now turn it over to LaToya, who will be giving us an overview tonight of Common Start.
All right, and I also want to kind of pick up a little bit where Colin just left off. This evening is about childcare and racial equity, but I also want to ground us in the fact that we live in a society that's steeped in structural racism, and what we're going to be talking about is how that racism shows up in childcare. Can I share my screen for a little bit just to give you some visuals so I'm not just talking at you for a second? There we go. Okay. I hope everyone can see my screen. For starters, here in Massachusetts and across our country, our nation's broken childcare system is one of the greatest drivers of racial inequity. And in Massachusetts, many families can't afford childcare. We have the second highest childcare cost in our country, averaging around $30,000 after Washington, D.C. And this affects Black families. Black families are more likely to live in areas that have fewer childcare options. And even if they can find that childcare, they cannot afford that childcare. Black families also suffer the cost of childcare more acutely because there is a racial wealth gap that exists here in Massachusetts. And even a median income Black family has to spend a higher percentage of their income compared to a white family on childcare. And 13% of Black families have experienced a job disruption due to childcare. And this is prior to the pandemic. And when we say a job disruption, that means having to change a job, having to quit a job, having to work fewer hours, or even not being able to pursue a type of career that they want because they lack childcare. It also, when we talk about racism in childcare, we have to think about our educators and our childcare providers. 41% of all people who work in childcare in Massachusetts are people of color. Many of them are small business owners operating family childcare out of their home or at small centers. And our educators earn wages as little as $14 an hour. And many of them live in poverty and can't afford to pay for the type of care that they're providing to other people's children, which again is steeped in our historical structural racism in this country. That goes back to slavery, when Black women had to care for white women's children and they couldn't care for their own children. And that same sort of disrespect that was present then exists now in childcare, and because we don't value the people who are doing the work as a society and structurally. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're grounded in that when we're talking about what racial equity is and how that's showing up in childcare. And I can share some resources as well in the chat where you can, if you want to learn more about the history of childcare here in our country. But we also have a lot of people here tonight who are ready to share their stories and how that inequity is showing up in their lives personally and in their work. And so I want to invite Bree back on so she can introduce our roundtable tonight, because I think you guys came here to hear people share their stories, but I just wanted to ground us in how that there's a historical reference in that. So Bree, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, LaToya, for sharing that with us. So now we will go into the Common Start anthem to get everybody energized about this movement and We've given you a little bit of groundwork to start you off with the history, and now let's talk about what we're doing today.
What a child experiences in the first 3 years of life is critical to their brain development and success. Yet early educators are severely underpaid and childcare is unaffordable for many families. It's time to invest in our children, in families, in our communities. A common start is a stronger future.
Everyone can be a part. Give us a common start. Equal opportunities for all communities. We need more. Give the children wings to soar. Broken dreams, let's restore. I'm down and out. I'm not looking for a handout, but I can't make it without a little help. I wanna take the next step, help my family build wealth, but I can't afford childcare. Feels like too much.
Trying to make a difference, I'm hoping to make a change. Sometimes I feel overworked and I'm knowing I'm underpaid, but working hard don't compare to the smiles up on their face. See that they growing happy and smarter like every day, but some people see me as a glorified babysitter, like I'm working 3 jobs just so I can play with them. We teach them lessons that they need for every day with them. Learn their first steps, their first words, and potty train with them. These are the most important years of their life. I don't do it for the money, I just do it cause it's right. But I can't afford my rent, I gotta shut off all my lights. And the college that is knocking, so I can't give up the fight. Equal opportunity, knowledge is what I stand for. Giving up my passion is something I never planned for. Something's gotta give, we just ask for a little help. Because children are the future, they can't do it by themselves.
Everyone can be a part. Give us a common start. Equal opportunities for all communities. We need more. Give the children wings to soar. Broken dreams, let's restore.
This is for every child, family, provider, early educator, employer, and community member. A common start is a stronger future.
So we saw this video and hopefully it energized everyone to understand that we are all here tonight because we believe that a common start is a stronger future. And I'd like to take a moment to allow people to drop just one word in the chat about what they thought after watching the anthem. You got to hear a little bit of the history. What did you get from the anthem? I see always energizing, unifying, real, empowering, hope, reality, facts, stronger together, enthusiasm, empowering. Thank you all. So I wanted to share some of those words with you that we see in the chat to understand that we are all here for a common purpose. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers, a part of this roundtable discussion. Any information that we give you all will be qualitative. It will be the quality of these stories that we are providing, these testimonies of people who have personally experienced the woes of the childcare systems and the needs that we have in our community. So without further ado, I'd first like to welcome Nellie Medina from Neighbor to Neighbor. She is going to speak to us today to the question of, as a parent or caregiver, how has cost and limits to access impacted you and your family? Welcome, Nellie.
Everyone, thank you for thank you, Bree, Latoya, and all the organizers for this event. I prepared a little speech I want to go into before I talk, just because it's very emotional for me. So where I live in Worcester, the high cost of childcare exacerbates socioeconomic and racial and ethnic inequalities. At the same time, in regions across Massachusetts, families with young children like myself are spending more on childcare than housing, food, or healthcare. Unfortunately, on average, the early care and education setting attended by many young children, particularly in low-income children and BIPOC, provide quality at levels too low to adequately promote children's learning and development. First generation graduates like me from underserved communities pay too much for reliable care, childcare. Parents and caregivers throughout my inner city community have struggled to find affordable healthcare arrangements. For example, as a single mother making $200 over the assessed poverty line, I do not qualify for affordable childcare. The cost would overwhelm and plunge my son and I into deep poverty. Therefore, my immunocompromised son on the autism spectrum is homeschooled as I work 40 hours a week, which means he has little social interaction. Now I have to decide between making a future for my son and I, moving out of subsidized housing, and leaving my job to afford quality childcare. The Common Start bill would provide assistance to people of nearly all income levels, making childcare truly affordable no matter how much money a family makes. It would ensure that families, caretakers, and single parents caring for children with disabilities have the resources they need to ensure consistent access to high quality early education and childcare, which will assist families like mine whose success or lack thereof is connected to access to affordable childcare for their children. So what I'm seeing here is that there's not enough childcare. A lot of the families that I work with and who are around me have children that attend school half days, so they don't qualify for healthcare. I remember dropping off my son to school nervous because I didn't have the money that day to pay for the sitter. I paid 30% of my income on subsidized housing, another 20% on transportation, and another 30%. And I was making $12,000 a year as a full-time student. And so I think that poverty is directly impacted by childcare. If I had reliable and safe childcare for my immunocompromised and special needs child, we'd be living a different life right now. This bill is so important, and I know it's not going to be for me. I know it might take some time to get passed, but I'm going to advocate as hard as I can on behalf of the Parents Union of Massachusetts and myself as a mom, because these hardships stay with you forever. And it doesn't have to be this hard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nellie, for sharing your story with us. And now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, which will be Dorothy Williams, who will speak to us about, as an early educator, what needs to be done to support your critical work.
Thank you so much, Bree. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm going to share a different light on the subject from the former speaker, as I am a family child care provider in the Dorchester area for the past 14 years. And since the pandemic, things have actually been very difficult based on the fact that I have more part-time children than I've ever had. So therefore, meeting my break-even point on a monthly basis has proved to be challenging. I've found now that I've had to diversify the children that I provide care for. At one point in time, I was 100% voucher, but based on the rate that you receive from a voucher, it's not sustainable. So therefore, I have found myself in a situation where I've had to bring on private children in order to sustain my business. Not to say that they don't need the service, why, of course they do. But because I live in the Dorchester area, I would prefer to provide services for my at-risk community. I feel as though that if we were given a rate that is suitable and based on a living wage, then you would find more providers willing to take on voucher children. And you would find more providers who would be willing to stay in the business. I can share with you several people are leaving based on the fact that we do not have benefits. We work long hours, and we find ourselves, especially after a child reaches the age of 2, that the funding source is decreased. But yet, if I was in another part of the Massachusetts area, my daily hourly rate based on the voucher system would be very high. It would not be the rate that we currently receive in my area, which is called Region 6. So it would be very helpful if people would take a good hard look at that, because in the end, this is about sustainability, which right now equals to financial strength and running a business. Yes, I may be in my home, but because I have a staff member, I'm responsible for payroll, I'm responsible for insurance, I'm responsible for making sure I keep my staff. Continuity of care is extremely important when you're dealing with children. And I would not like to have my staff rotate because I'm not able to pay them. Yes, people have talked about giving people an increase, but how do you sustain that increase? A bonus here and there is nice, but it may not necessarily keep people under your employer. So I just want to make sure that long-term, we all take a good hard look at what Commonwealth is proposing, because again, it's going to impact our community, which is going to impact our children and our future.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for coming and sharing your story with us. Next, I'd like to introduce our third speaker, who will answer to the question of, as a provider, what problems did you face prior to versus during the pandemic? Please welcome Sheila Henry of SEIU 509.
Hello, how are you? Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
Okay. Welcome. Listen, well, in the beginning, the problems that I kind of dealt with was sort of like the young lady that just got off. I just feel personally that, you know, we're taking in kids for 10-hour days and we're not being reimbursed enough. You know, a lot of my own money I used to use for like different things for the children, whether it be buying the kids a coat or just doing things because that mom was paying me and trying to meet ends at home. And so I feel like, you know, we need to have more pay for the providers. We need to have better benefits for the parents or better voucher system to work with the parents and the money that they get in. That was prior to the pandemic. But now that the pandemic is here, there are no fundings for vouchers, you know, and we're still fighting for increase for the providers. You know, it's horrible when you think about all the love and the I don't know, all the love and the support you give to the not only the children, but to their families. So I'd like to just see us get better wages and fight for vouchers for parents that truly need it.
Thank you so much, Sheila, for coming and sharing your perspective with us. Our last and final speaker is Maria Moeller, who will speak to, as an agency provider, what problems did you face prior to versus during the pandemic?
Thank you, Bree. Like Bree said, I'm Maria Moeller, and I am CEO of the community group in Lawrence, which is a BIPOC community. I think I want to focus on access and share a little bit of our story in Lawrence to hopefully highlight what could possibly happen at the state level and some of the possibilities for our field. As an agency in a BIPOC community in Lawrence and a provider, you know, we had to navigate the system as much as our families did in order for families to access childcare services and to make sure that we got them the help they were looking for when they walked through our doors. And access was already an issue prior to the pandemic. You know, anybody that is a provider here or works in childcare is aware of that. And it's an issue for both providers and especially for families, obviously, because they are the ones in need of childcare, and childcare is, again, a foundational need for families in order to survive. During the pandemic, obviously, this became a much worse issue, especially in communities like Lawrence, because many of our families didn't have the option to work remotely. They needed childcare, whether or not there was a pandemic here, and our programs remained open. So, you know, most of our families working at essential workers were able to access childcare services with the flexibilities that the state allowed at that point. But then as things started reopening and students went to remote learning, families started facing some access issues into childcare. They couldn't access childcare vouchers for some, you know, for one reason or another, you know, the same issues that they have right now to access subsidies. That triggered also families to start, specifically in Lawrence, there was a case where families were placing children in unlicensed care, which is very unsafe for them. You know, and obviously it was an unsafe situation. So we partnered with the city in a true spirit of collaboration and developed a city childcare voucher, taking into consideration the needs, the specific needs of our community. And this is what I want to highlight here. Every community has different needs, and it was really nice to be able to develop something that our families could use and truly get help from. So we partnered with the city again, we developed childcare vouchers, we eliminated what the barriers we perceived as most important from keeping our families from accessing childcare. And there were some revealing findings that we could learn from. I mean, currently we have 289 children placed in childcare through these vouchers that surprisingly, these families, over half of 50% of them were eligible for state subsidies, but somehow we're not able to access it, right? Because of technology barriers, language barriers, paperwork, bureaucratic barriers. And we eliminated those. Those families were able to access vouchers. We allowed access to families within the cliff as well. So those families were able to make more money and maybe earn more, because again, many of them are being paid a little more per hour, and still be eligible for vouchers, so they can still progress, you know, get some progress or move forward. And most of the adjustments that we made in this program were equity related, you know, because again, they removed the barriers that only our families face, you know, not necessarily every family. So I think we have a little bit to learn at the state level, and we can definitely, there are ways to, at the community level, you're understanding the needs of our communities. There are ways to remove some of those, and we have to be very much dig deep in the regulation to see where those are, to make a big difference for our families. Because again, lack of access to childcare for our families at that point meant lack of employment, which meant lack of food, which meant, you know, many bad things, especially during the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing your story with us as well. So now we will begin to come into a spotlighted portion where we will tie the pieces of these testimonies together to how racial equity impacts these issues raised. So next, I'd like to highlight Edna Cubillos and allow her to tell her story, and then everyone else will talk specifically to how the issues they raise tie into racial equity. Welcome, Edna. You can go ahead.
Buenas noches. Mi nombre es Edna, vivo en Worcester, soy educadora de cuidado infantil familiar por 6 años y estoy muy contenta de estar con todos ustedes y vengo a abogar por desarrollo profesional en nuestro idioma. Nosotros trabajamos con niños de diferentes razas, nacionalidades, culturas e idiomas. Y la forma en que venimos a este país, todas las personas, es muy diferente. Hay gente que llega muy joven, hay gente que llega de mediana edad y hay gente que llega con una edad más avanzada. Y para todos tenemos dificultades con el inglés. Y si a eso se le suma que el desarrollo profesional no lo podemos coger en nuestro idioma, dificulta las cosas. Todo esto para decir que sería... para mí como hispana y y somos un gremio muy grande en el Family Child Care, conseguir desarrollo profesional, porque esto se ve reflejado en la comunidad y en todas nuestras familias. El hecho de que nosotros nos podamos profesionalizar y que tengamos una mejor calidad de cuidado infantil en los niños, eso lo va a reflejar en los niños, en las familias y por ende en nuestra comunidad. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Edna. So next, we will spotlight all of the wonderful speakers that you heard tonight, and we will allow them to answer to the question of how does racial equity tie into these issues?
Okay, well, I can go. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd like to say one, as the Western Mass chapter coordinator for the Common Start Coalition, one of the things that, started to come to light when you're talking to families, doing outreach, and really trying to get families to understand. So families realize that there's an issue. They realize, okay, I've signed up, like I'm on this wait list, I'm waiting for access to care. Or once I have access to care, this voucher is supposed to subsidize the child care that I need, but yet I'm still having barriers even with the parent fee. But families may not have immediately realized what it was or some of the barriers that was actually impacting or the system behind some of the challenges that they were facing. So one of the things I want to say is that the coalition has been really helpful in educating families on, yes, you're facing these barriers, but let us explain why. And these are also the same families who are coming from, of course, marginalized communities, get their same services in the same marginalized communities that they come from, and may not even realize that their childcare providers are facing some of the same issues that they are facing, and yet they're giving even more and more of themselves to the families. Like Sheila's story that she told really resonated. During my time as the family childcare coordinator for 509, I would hear a lot of stories about how family childcare providers were overextending themselves at times when they may not have had the resources totally for their families, but they were making sure to secure that for the other families. It's causing an issue, racially, because when we look at Black women, especially in the workforce, and their attempt to try to tap into industries that they may not normally operate in, when we talk about like things like the building trades or, certain truck driving or, certain STEM areas. And when you have a lack of access to childcare so that you can't get to your college course, or so that you can't get to that non-standard hour work shift, those early morning starts, or maybe that second shift work to get the overtime, it really puts an impact and it widens the racial equity gap that the families, that need the service the most are facing.
Thank you so much, Janae. Would anyone else like to jump in to speak directly to how their testimonies relates to racial equity in childcare?
Yes, I'd like to speak on this because I, have found myself in a situation where I no longer care for the children who are on vouchers in terms of my numbers. I've had to reduce my numbers. I am now only at 30%, where at one point in time in the history of my business, I was at 100%. And that's because I can no longer afford to care for the voucher children and maintain staff. If I did that, I would have to reduce my numbers from 10 to 6 in order to stay in business. And so you have to take a hard look at that. I mean, I'm dealing with parents who, because of the location I'm at, work for the hospitals, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a nurse or they're a physician. They may have jobs where, they may not be on, they may be entry-level positions, and therefore their salary may not necessarily be able to cover, and they have the vouchers. And so what are you supposed to do? I still need to turn the lights on. I still need to have a phone. I still need to pay, my mortgage. So it's a catch-22 because I want to provide services for my community, but yet I find myself again, because of the bias, and because of the lack of funding that's associated with this, you have to make a hardcore decision. I don't, from my own personal business ethics, no, this is not the original idea, but unfortunately, this is what has become based on economics.
Thank you.
I just want to touch on that a little bit more about what Dorothy said, because we saw this exacerbated during the pandemic, where when you're talking about those frontline workers that work in those essential industries, they did not have the opportunity to work from home. You know, and right where there were some families, even like myself, where I had the opportunity to work from home. And so I could have my children with me and still maintain my job. When these same families are also the families that are people of color in these frontline positions that cannot afford to work from home, but don't have equitable access to childcare, you know, that threatens the sustainability of their children. On the other side, when you look at, especially, again, you notice I'm going to make reference to family childcare because that's where a lot of my professional background comes from on this matter. But family childcare providers were so amiable during the pandemic, and they were the ones expanding their programs so that they could provide that all-day care, expanding some of those children who were usually either before or after school, and they had to provide all-day care for them, right? And so now you have these licensed professionals who just only 10 years ago were really viewed by society as just babysitters. And you know, and primarily we're talking primarily women of color, and a substantial amount of them are Black women. And so just making sure that we elevate their status within the education system, because we need to make sure we remember the important role that they play in the economy of our state, and especially for uplifting the wages and employment for people of color.
And you're absolutely right. I want to touch on that as well, because I was an emergency family child care provider during the pandemic. And yes, indeed, I had to provide services for children that were not in my particular expertise. I had to deal with preschoolers, and I ended up having the majority of my kids were school age. And so you have to adjust your curriculum. You have to, you know, get ready and get prepared. And I did that during, you know, the duration. And, you know, it was challenging, but it was, you know, a learning curve, of course, but we did it. And you're absolutely right. It is women of color. I mean, this is, unfortunately, this profession has always been looked upon as, how can I put it, second class. I mean, because you're not a center. All right. So they feel as though that family child care, all you're doing is sitting a child in front of a TV all day long. No, we have curriculums. We have activities. We take them on field trips. We do the exact same thing. We feed them. We do all the things that they would do if they were in a center and more, with love and kindness and smaller numbers, which made them safer, believe it or not, during the pandemic, because most parents didn't want their children to be in a large group setting because of this. So, you know, and whether you have a degree or not, I mean, I have my master's degree, and all I can say to you is that the people are so uninformed in terms of what we do and how we do it, that it's mind-boggling to me. Because again, the stigma is that we're sitting children in front of a TV. No, we are not. And
Yes.
that needs to be
Can I
valid.
agree? Can I jump in if you don't mind, Bree?
Yes, please.
So I just wanted to also just kind of jump in and share. I thank all the providers and all the caregivers that have already spoken, but can we talk about the disenfranchised women that we have within the workforce? Those women that do have jobs, still need childcare, cannot get a voucher, and have to come out of pocket, and with the low income and all the wraparound early ed childcare education that we're talking about. We have to talk about it from all perspectives, not just from the provider's perspective and from those that services and so on, but we have to look at it from the mama's point of view, because the moms are the foundation of the family, you know. And when you go out into the workforce, for say example, my story, my daughter has a good job. It's not a high paying job, but it's a good job. You know, she still had rent. She had all of that. During the pandemic, she experienced something that I don't think that women should ever experience. My granddaughter was about 2 years old or so when we did the lockdown and the shutdown, and she had to continue to pay her care provider for her child while she couldn't take her to the facility, right? So she was still paying it. And then about maybe 4 months in, 5 months in, it was like, you know, I'm gonna have to stop paying because now she's in the house more. There's more groceries having to be bought, more because you're not going out to work, you're not going out, you know, so you're doing more bill creation now that you're working from home, but you still have to provide to pay for the slot. So when she stopped paying for the slot, she lost that slot, you know, and was not able to get the slot back because she couldn't pay for the slot anymore because she had to balance the difference. So we have to look at what Common Start is about. Common Start is about complete wraparound early ed, childcare, caregiving. We got to look at it from all perspectives. And that's one of the reasons why the Massachusetts Commission, when we did our childcare hearing, we heard so much from the mamas, from all diverse communities, disenfranchised, low income, because you got to think about disenfranchised and low income are in different levels. You know what I'm saying? So I want to say that we have to mention that. I have to mention that not all of the mothers that can't get the vouchers are able to smoothly go through this. They are having the struggles and they're having issues just as the disenfranchised communities are, you know, because we're still all disenfranchised, because we know race and equity is not across the board for everyone, you know. So if you have a good job, you still might not be getting paid to the right wage that you should be paid to be able to accomplish what you need to do for your family. So I just needed to mention that before we go any further. All right, thank you, Bree.
No problem. Thank you so much, Meredith.
Yeah, I just wanted to point
Yes.
out that over in the first 8 months of the pandemic, 75,000 moms left the workforce and 70% were BIPOC. And so that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with moms who had to leave the workforce, which is really devastating. Another thing that happened, which is about information and race, is that a lot of the moms are uninformed. They didn't know that they can furlough for a year, that they didn't have to take their immunocompromised children out of the house, and they lost their spots. I found out later that I could have kept it because I felt that my son wasn't safe. And so I think that we have to make sure that agencies that are distributing these vouchers have emotional intelligence and understand that we are not all informed and that we're all operating on different levels. Like I said, because I say I'm $200 above, it doesn't mean that I'm in a great place. It means that if I take my son to childcare, if I pay these high costs, that we will be back in poverty. And so a lot of the moms that I work with, they say they'd rather not work because it costs too much. And so that's the cliff effect. And that's how they keep us in poverty. So we do need this hurdle. We need to overcome this hurdle so that this is not an issue, so that we can get to the next step. But for moms who don't maybe have the education or don't have the knowledge or are afraid of the system or from another country, the cliff effect is real. And I think we have to educate parents and educators and agencies about this. Otherwise, we're going to get nowhere. I mean, childcare is great, but if you're going nowhere and there's no end product, then you know you're just spending your money and you're going in circles. And so we need to help parents with that.
I would say that the current system, and thank you, Meredith, because the whole field needs some restructuring and some system changes, so systemic change in order for providers and families to benefit from it. I think they both need a great amount of support, but it's very uncomfortable, and I'm speaking as an agency and a provider also, but it's just very uncomfortable when parents come in as trying to access childcare, and the regulations basically are developed based on the assumption that it's a fraud, and to be perfectly blunt, and it just feels very uncomfortable to treat parents that way versus taking the approach of like, how can we help you? How can we make sure that we get that access? What are the flexibilities that we can apply here that will get you what you need in order to be successful and have feed your family, something as basic as that. So I think we need to refocus, how we develop regulations and eligibility versus just trying to make a list of things that you need to provide, in order to make sure that you're not stealing money, because I just find that insulting.
Agreed. Thank you all so much. Would anyone that has not spoken in this part of the discussion like to speak up to give their perspective? Okay, thank you all so much for providing your stories, your experience, and your perspective today. And for everyone who's watching here, you have heard from multiple perspectives tonight. You've heard from an early educator, from a child care provider, an agency provider, a family care provider, and parents who are the most important people a part of this process, the people who are affected. And we also heard about, more specifically, our providers who are parents that don't have access to the necessary information and resources to not be disenfranchised within their communities. And you've heard how this all ties into racial equity and how Common Start is going to provide solutions to this. You will hear in just a bit. But next, I'd like to welcome back LaToya to give us an overview of Common Start.
Thank you, everybody, for that spirited conversation. And I also want to highlight in the chat, Ayanna Crawford put up the definition of what cliff effect means, in case anyone was listening and was saying, what are you talking about? I like to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Sometimes we start speaking in jargon, and in case everybody doesn't understand. I also want to highlight, like, who is the Common Start Coalition? So the Common Start Coalition is a statewide partnership of organizations and providers, parents, early educators, advocates, all working together to make high quality early education and childcare affordable and accessible to all Massachusetts families. Currently, there are 136 groups and it's growing. And the goal is to ensure that all families have the care solutions that they need and that all children in the Commonwealth have the same strong start and enter school on a level playing field. During the immediate recovery from the pandemic and over the long term, access to affordable, high quality early education and childcare is critical to building a stronger, more equal and just Massachusetts. And the Common Start Coalition is committed to making that vision a reality. And so I also, and just that conversation was just very spirited. And so we keep talking about the Common Start Coalition. And so now it's time to talk about what is the Common Start bill? And I want to invite Meredith back on. She jumped in the conversation earlier. I want to invite you back on. So, and you started doing some of this already, talking about, you know, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about affordability. We talked about that cliff effect, like, you know, you make a few dollars over, you lose your voucher. We talk about, you know, I want you to explain more too, when you talked about your daughter having to pay to keep that slot. We're talking about this shortage and workers leaving and the pay and the whole shebang. So Meredith is gonna kind of explain for us how the Common Start bill can help tackle some of the things that we spoke about tonight. So it's all on you, Meredith.
Thank you, LaToya. Thank you, Bree. My name is Meredith Tuitt, as they stated. I am also a commissioner with the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. The Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women is one of the coalition members for Common Start. We have 11 regionals across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we all work collaboratively with the coalition to focus in on Common Start. The Common Start bill, H605 and S362, it's been put together to create accessible early childcare and early education and caregiving, a full wraparound entity through EEC, Early Education Council, where we can talk about how we assist all families have equal and sustainable higher education for our early education and childcare youth. It's an amendment to what we have already for our early education and childcare. We want to be able to have sustainable education across the board. We want to develop a method, and what Common Start did is we went out and we got public input. We got a lot of methodology to determine how we can do a higher quality early education and childcare across the Commonwealth, right? So we've done so much to come to the proper language, to the word, to what we need our legislators to be able to make change here in the Commonwealth, right? The legislation would establish a system of affordable, high quality early education and childcare in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts over a 5-year timeline. This system would cover early education, childcare from birth through age 5, as well as after school and out of school time for children between the ages of 5 to 12, and those with special needs up to the age of 15, right? So you've heard the providers, you've heard some of the parents, you've heard some of the caregivers, and I jumped in. I couldn't help myself. I had to jump in and talk about my daughter and what she went through, because we're still learning, we're still collecting conversations from within the communities and within all of our partner organizations, so we can understand if this language is we know what we have is good. And we want our legislators to buy into it. So we really want to be able to take the stories to the legislators and say, let's move forward with this, right? So we're asking for an increase in the scope of public investment in early education and childcare with an incremental rollout over 5 years that prioritizes the lowest income and the highest needed families. Those are our disenfranchised communities. The Common Start legislation would dramatically increase the affordability and quality of early education and childcare, right? James, can you throw the slides up, because I want to be able to share some of the work that we have done through the CLASP, right? So, so the Center for Law and Social Policy came up with some recommendations, and the coalition has bought into it. Can you go to the next slide, James? So Common Start aligns with increasing childcare investments to support equity. To address the inequities, childcare sectors needs sustained increased funding. We need, listen to what I'm saying, we need funding for equitable access for families. We need increased funding for job quality and compensation in childcare sectors, right? So when you think about it, you're thinking about expanding the professional development opportunities. You're thinking about compensation structure establishment, right? We're talking about Common Start for all children, all ages. Next slide, James. And so when we talk about that, and we talk about the different needs that we need a sustained closed providers and furnished emergency care. We need that. We need funding there, because especially through the pandemic, we have learned so much. Childcare in all aspects, in the home providers, in the early ed school systems, in the elementary school systems, in our middle school systems. We had so much, things were so pushed to a limit. We knew we had problems before within our early ed and childcare, but the pandemic really brought it all to the forefront. It was exacerbated in such a way that women had to give up their jobs. Women had to stay home to take care of their children and to take care, of their disabled children and the ones, and a lot of those young people felt so locked in, we had trauma, we had mental health, we had depression increase within our children in those ages. And this is something that we have, but not in a smaller number, but the pandemic brought it to the front. Can we go to the next slide, James? So we collected a lot of data. We spoke to a lot of families. We spoke to a lot of providers, right? We analyzed the data, and we disaggregated it into race and ethnicity and demographics and socioeconomic lifestyles. And it brought us a lot. We learned that employees by race and ethnicities, numbers of children enrolled by age group, family income range, race, ethnicity, country of origin, all of those put a little something extra in it, where you're coming from. And think about our parents, our mamas who were undocumented, who were out there doing domestic worker jobs and so on, and couldn't do those jobs because they needed to stay home with their children and still try to figure out how to pay their bills, do what they had to do. So we need wraparound services. We need early education care and child care and caregiving for all right? So so these are things we talked about. Can we jump 2 slides down, James? So Common Start aligns with increase in access and affordability. We're asking our policymakers to significantly reduce or eliminate childcare copays. We're asking for free for families for under 50% state median income. We are asking for a sliding scale to not exceed 7% of total income. We are asking our state representatives and our elected officials, all 200 and plus in here in the Commonwealth, to simply give us eligibility policies that are equitable. Listen to the word, equitable, right? And provide professional development and support for child care educators and caregivers. We need to recognize that there are some issues out there for them, and they need to have more staffing, more services, more intense remedial work, right? So this document here that we're sharing to you, and I see that they dropped it into the chat. Everyone, you can grab onto the class document, have that slide if you need. Can you jump to the next one? How the Common Start bill? Yeah, there you go. The Common Start bill would help children, families, educators, providers, and businesses. So everyone listen to that. It's going to help the children, the families, the educators, the providers, and the businesses, right? So we're not leaving anyone out with this Common Start. It's for everyone. It's all. We're all inclusive, right? So what we're asking, and we've got to be able to push it out. We have to be able to do what we have to do. Can you jump to the next one, Jane? So all of these slides are going to give you some information, give you stuff you can use, right? And all of us have the ability to reach out to our elected officials. You don't have to be a part of the coalition to push. I see a lot of my colleagues that I used to work with on Beacon Hill in the Zoom here with us. I see Christy from Senator Sal Domenico's office. I see a whole bunch of them there. So we want them to leave from tonight and go back to their bosses and say, you know, this bill is something that we all need, and we should be doing it for all of the families across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, disenfranchised, low income, those that are under the median income. We haven't had a COLA increase, and we haven't had a medium income increase in the Commonwealth in a while. And if our legislators buy into the Common Start, that would be able to help our families, right? So I really want to thank all of you guys for allowing me to come and speak on behalf of the Common Start Coalition and on behalf of the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women, because we strongly support the Common Start and we push it as much as we can, and we're asking you to support and push also. Back to Bree. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Meredith, for providing us with that background information into how Common Start will really work to address the issues that were discussed tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. Before you go, we have one more action step that we would like to give you all so that you can stay involved. Latoya has just dropped that link in the chat. Please go ahead and take a look at the text there, and please join us as we go on our journey to a common start for a stronger future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're still here, please also see the Black Mothers Matter event that will be hosted by Neighborhood Villages. The link to that is also dropped in the chat.